just apologise for our IT making you adjust your agenda. I really appreciate that, Sam. Thank you. So yeah, just to introduce myself, Strategic Manager for Vulnerability, Early Intervention and Prevention, and also the Force Mental Health Lead. So trying to follow on the work that Laura's doing with us in Force, I thought I'd just mention a few of the drivers really that are influencing the way we work, the way we think. And the main documents that we're looking at out there are the National Vulnerability Action Plan, which has just had a relaunch, and that goes from present to 2022. That focuses a lot on key areas such as recognition and response, mental health, access to services, appropriate action, tasking, analytics, evidence, governance, and all those things that help us to sort of try and put some processes in place within Force. Through that, what we have done then is we've got a Force early intervention strategy. That's a little bit more sort of less complicated, as in we put it down to 6 key areas, and then being identification of vulnerability, early support for those that we find are vulnerable, taking a problem-solving approach to vulnerability, partnership working, which obviously is going to be key for us as a Force, as Laura's already alluded to. It's sometimes those boundaries, whereas we recognise that we can't do anything more within our role, but who do we need to help support people further? And building community resilience and capacity. And I think that's been really interesting through the COVID situation to see pockets of the community come about that we'd not seen before, and prevention of crime and antisocial behaviour. So Sam's asked me to touch on a couple of things, one of those being the Early Intervention and Prevention Unit, which is very new. We actually launched on March the 30th, so a week into lockdown. But the reason we continued with the creation of the team is we've just gone through a whole 18-month consultation process. So I felt it was really key to just continue that because it involves so many people. And some of the reasons why we looked at having this central unit was it was very clear within Force that we didn't have that strategic ownership. There was a lot of teams under the same directorate, but we were functioning separately, not clear processes for working. And I think that no clear objectives, and that came in respect of, okay, so if we haven't got clear objectives and we haven't got a clear framework and a process for working, what are the expectations of us working within vulnerability? Legacy working was an interesting one. Again, this was about people understanding the Force priorities and the ways in which we're working moving forward. Sometimes when you ask the question, why are we doing that? The response was, it's what we've always done. So we really had to look at some of why that was, and actually if what we've always done was in line with the future vision. And also some of the elements of inconsistency. There was definitely real strong key areas of vulnerability where there was a lot of focus, there was consistent plans, there was people who would be classed as subject matter experts, but then that wasn't reflected in some of the other areas either. So what we started to look and what we did the business case on was that strategic ownership, moving it, and the only way we could clearly see to get involved in that was to move it to a central team with some clear performance framework, and so that we could pull together all those elements of working that were taking place within the Force. That also led to a review of the roles and the structure. What we actually did is we brought together already established teams into a central unit, but we're asking them to work in a different way than what they were doing at the time. It was also to give us the opportunity as well with the restructure. So if we could get rid of some of the legacy working, it actually gave us some capacity to focus on other areas. And we were able to widen the remit of where we were working. So in particular, looking at business crime, adults at risk, real-time surveillance around suicide, widening child sexual exploitation into child exploitation and child abuse. So it did give us that opportunity to do that. And what was very clear is that we would have a problem-solving approach and really embed that ethos within the unit. Ultimately, then that would lead to less duplication, impact on demand, increased activity. And what we were really, really keen to do was to make sure that actually we didn't work in silos, that we did have that link to the units such as Laura's referred to, the harm reduction hubs, and beyond that within neighbourhood policing and some of our specialised units such as offender management and safeguarding. I've popped a definition in there because I have said to Sam she can share this presentation. But I think the key things, we like to have a definition of what the unit stands for. And I think the key things to pull out of that for me would be evidence-based specialist advice, identifying emerging trends. So instead of just being reactive, we were preparing for the themes that were coming through, using national best practice as well. And that was about not only linking with wider partners, but also using the other 42 other forces to say, actually, have you had this problem? What did you do about it? What worked well? And really using that benchmarking. And consolidate close partnership working. Again, it goes back to we can't always answer the problem in isolation. The partnership working is really key. Having a structured problem solving method around us so that people understood what we meant by problem solving. And that also meant that we didn't just look at short term, but we looked at medium and long term strategies for solutions. And prevention focused way of working. We've always got that insight to, but how can we stop it? How can we address it earlier? So true early intervention and prevention. Again, I've covered off there. So there's 20 areas of business that we cover within the unit. As I say, we had the opportunity when we did the restructure to open that up. So again, you might see some things that they've got key areas of vulnerability. We've also got the licensing department within our unit. Some people might think, why is that? But licensing are a key unit for us, especially around licensed premises, in respect of not only can they go in around the law and legislation and the expectations for the person holding that licensing, but it gives us the opportunity to maybe where we might have problem premises. So take an example of like a hotel. It might have, we could use the licensing, but we might have concerns that it's been used to take young people there to be exploited. We can open that up to then the lead for child exploitation. We can open that up to our architectural liaison officers who can look at the actual environment, and we can offer a better response in those areas. And volunteers was a really interesting one that came as part of the unit. So we've got responsibility for the coordination of our cadets, so hopefully our up and coming officers of the future. We've also have responsibility for the recruitment and the training of our special constabulary. We also have police support volunteers. So again, that might be people like the chaplains, that might be your speed watch, but also we've just widened volunteers where we're starting to look at what we're calling community connectors. So it's about linking in with those already established groups that are out there. And again, with COVID, I think that's brought them to the forefront a little bit more, that how we can use them to build on that community engagement and community reassurance. We had to put a resourcing model in, and part of that is because we didn't know what would come in the units. So we had to be clear about how we were going to manage that. And again, looking at using evidence-based practice, using what's out there nationally and regionally. So the income really, as we see it, will be from our neighbourhoods, our safeguarding and our partners. And we look at it that actually we should either be the first point of contact, as in, I have this problem, what have you got to assist me? Or the last point of contact, as in, I've got this problem, I've done A, B and C, and actually I'm still at X, Y and Z. I need more of a focus on it. And that's where we come in to offer that wider support. And when it comes in with the outcomes we will be looking at, we've kept it really flexible when we refer to the term a product, because that product might be a training package, it might be part of the core functions, it might be a review of policy and protocols, it could be we're putting a problem-solving product together using the Zara model. It could be that we're looking at toolkits or any specialist support. So we have kept it very varied on what the response could be. And also looking at the unit and the way that we look at the impact of vulnerability. When we look at creating the product, we really need to look at what the impact is on that. And again, we weren't capturing that in enough detail. This is a bit of a test slide. So what we were keen, this graph is what we call the brain. So this is basically, if I was an MPT commander, I would be able to come in and have a look on my area at particular crime types to see very visually what the trends are, the up and down spike and where I am at the minute. What we've now done is, because again, we're very good at putting a reaction in place, but we weren't always good at assessing. So what we've done now is, if you can see on the green bit, we've created, and you would not believe how difficult this was for our IT system, but basically we can now input when we're going to implement a product, and it will form this green shadow for the length of that time. And we will then be able to have a snapshot, sort of a visual on what's been the impact. And again, depending on what our objective is, that might go up if we're looking to increase reporting, or if we're trying to tackle antisocial behaviour, that might go down. But that gives a clear record of, as an neighbourhood policing team commander, to say, actually something happened there and it went the way that I would like it to, what happened, and they can go back, and instead of having to go and start from scratch on a separate response to it, there's a response that's already there with the objective and with the impact that's required from it. So we've started to look at implementing that. The next slide gives you a bit of how we sort of link it all in. So you've got the elements of the National Vulnerability Action Plan is a real key driver for us. We are monitored on it. We do regular benchmarking requests for it. We've got the early intervention strategy, as alluded to, and then the products. And also we take on board as well the national recommendations, any inspections, so whatever comes out of inspections in particular areas, we bring that into our action plan. The problem solving was really interesting because we've broke it down into levels. So basically, level 1 is what we call foundation. It's what everybody should have. Everybody should have that understanding of what problem solving looks like within their role. The level 2 and level 3 is then when you start looking at maybe champions and single points of contact within the units. And that would be our unit in particular, would be level 3, and the harm reduction hubs, because they need that little bit more knowledge around maybe complex issues. And the level 4 is basically around that force tasking. So this is where we get real clear senior leadership buy-in into this, because a lot of the elements of people being able to work in vulnerability and being given permission to work that way is about actually they want to feel that they are supported from the top down to make those decisions. That's really important. And the next slide shows you we have a continual. So those are thematic plans that we work to, community safety plans that we work to with partners, the national action plan. But we've also built in enough process within the unit to be reactive. So when we've got campaigns that come up that we want to be part of, any operations that we have to, any inspections that get announced, we've got that resilience within the team to be able to respond to that. And the next slide just basically talks you through our process for what comes in. I think what is important though is that 2 questions we do ask when a request is received is, what's your objective and what's already been done? And that makes it very clear around ownership then, and the clarity around what impact are you actually looking for, so that we can work on the right tools and products. It also then allows us for a very clear evaluation and assessment process. And just moving on to the early intervention officers, again, Laura's already alluded to them. So these were PCSOs that we invested in, raising their awareness, giving extra training for them to work in a slightly different way to support what we would class as vulnerable people. And that first started off with repeat demand. The pilot started in Rugeley. A lot of this was about changing thought processes and changing culture. So from that, what's the matter to what matters process. We very much focused on the Egan model. So for those of you who might have worked in social care situations or have colleagues in there, this is a very common model to them. So that really looking at what is going on, what do I want instead, and how might I achieve what I want. This is a bit how we looked at it. We were very good at treating the symptom. So that was the thing that we were presented with when we got to the incident, but not necessarily always the real root causes of us. So then we saw this revolving door process of people weren't getting what they want and actually just ringing 999 again, and we would go out and we would respond in a way that would be okay in that immediate, but then never had any longevity around it. Again, intervention happens too late or not at all. So we have a majority of the population that are living their lives well. What we've got then is that I could go either way, and then we got the help me where it would become more complex. What we found was that I could go either way was very difficult, because the chances were, if you didn't access support or weren't offered the right support, or your needs weren't identified properly, then actually you wouldn't go to living your life well. Your problems will become more complicated and more complex, and the risk would rise in that respect. Again, looking at this, a lot of referrals, and a lot of the time we're driven by organisational and service boundaries. And there was, with individuals, when we started to look at case studies, a lot of people involved, and it tended to be a refer, assess, do process. But actually, we were really light on the doing bit. We were very good at referring, very good at assessing, but very light on the actual doing, which was the important bit for the person in need. So we took 4 PCSOs, identified people, and started to really work in a different way. And again, that was changing culture, because we were working with the problem regardless of that organisational fit. So we were coming across things that we didn't necessarily know about. But actually, the PCSO's job was not to be a master of everything. It was to recognise what the need was with the person who had the need, and be able to identify the correct pathway. And interestingly, a lot of the cases that we went into, we actually stripped back the number of services that were involved, because we got into this culture of, I know what this person needs, let's go throw this service at them, let them have this service there. And we were going into cases that had 10 and above services involved. So, oh, it's disappeared off my screen, Sam. Can you hear me? Oh, my slideshow's disappeared. I'm not too sure what's happened. Oh, there we go, I think. Okay, I'll just flick through them again, sorry. So as I was saying, we got, people had got over 10 services all knocking at the door, with good intention, offering support. But actually, if you're a person who's got a drug habit and a mental health issue, our expectations were far too much in relation to that. And we were stripping back what we felt, because there was just too many services. And then needed to build up trust with people. And actually, there needed to be some quick wins. People needed to feel that they were against something, that something was happening, that change was positive, to keep repeating to do that. So that's where we started. We had some recommendations from the Rugeley about rolling it out and having some central lead in respect of it. And also the partner bit was really crucial. And how we got the partner buy-in was that our partners, whoever we identified was going to be really useful to help us to work with vulnerable people, they were the ones that delivered our training and our awareness sessions. So we got that real partnership working. And the criteria that came through it, it's about repeat demand. So it was those people that were constantly ringing, so either our top 10 callers, it was the people that were presenting and actually didn't quite meet an offender management process. As I say, going back to the orange bit of the triangle, sometimes people didn't meet those thresholds, so therefore no service was given. And actually their problems had to be more complicated before they got that service. So that's the criteria that we're looking at. Repeat victims within our communities and non-MARAC cases as well. So basically, again, we just followed the Eden model, but we stripped it back to what we're looking at. So that was about identifying what the issue. All the assessments are done with the person that we're working with within their environment to which they choose They have total control. This is their story. It's not our story, because actually we saw a lot of plans and assessments that had every service's say so on what they thought the situation was, and the biggest bit missing was the actual person's story themselves. And actually it was that person that needed to change, so that was really important. So it was about identifying the root causes, and some of that had to be negotiation, because some of the things that needed to change were really, really difficult, so they would avoid them. But actually, as I said, going back to the quick wins, we could offer some up. So there was a lot of negotiation, understanding what those needs are, navigating, making sure they could get the right help, and measuring, learning and adapting from it. So it was always that process throughout any support plan that we put in place. So the approach, basically, the PCSOs sit within the harm reduction hubs, and they are owned locally, and that is the right model. They are supported centrally by ourselves, and that is around training, awareness, development, and that's also, we do have 6 weekly supervision with them as well. Now there's 2 elements of supervision that go on. There's the day-to-day bit that comes from the harm reduction hub in respect of their everyday working and the cases they hold. And the 6 weekly supervision is a real look at the cases, and also as sort of given us the sort of vision of the future working that we're going to be doing with Sam around reflective practice. And I think that's it.